Welcome back to Face the Nation. President Biden travels to El Paso today after announcing new border enforcement actions last week. Democratic Congresswoman Veronica Escobar will travel with the president to Texas later today. I'm so glad you could join us.
Thank you for having me.
So the president is going to visit one of the busiest ports of entry in El Paso. He's going to meet with officials and other aid organizations. What can he do to make sure that this 3-hour visit is more than just a photo op?
Well, we've worked with the White House to make sure that all the folks who are actually doing the work on the ground day to day are the ones that the president will meet with. He needs to hear about how, over time, the challenges that we have faced as a country on immigration, on border issues, they have grown exponentially.
So we looked at the latest CBS polling. Only 38% of Americans actually approve of what the president is doing on immigration. 62% disapprove. This has consistently been one of his weakest issues. And it was just this last week he gave his very first speech on the border policy. For the first time, he's going today. And it's taken, 2 years to find some kind of alternative to Title 42. I understand it's going before the Supreme Court, but why is it taking so long to get just this?
This challenge that we're facing is so complex. I'm with you. I would have loved to have seen the administration lean in on immigration from day one.
Why didn't
because,
they?
You know, you'd have to ask them that. The executive branch is not the only branch of government that needs to do its job, though. Mm-hmm. And I will tell you, I've worked very closely with Secretary Mayorkas. He has been phenomenal. Every idea that I have asked him to explore, he has. Every collaboration I've asked him to engage in, he has. Where I've hit a brick wall is Congress. Mm-hmm. And frankly, Democrats and Republicans alike. Yeah. I'm hoping things change. There's a bipartisan delegation going to El Paso from the Senate tomorrow, and I hope they see what the president will see today, which is opportunity, but also long overdue work.
Let's talk about what the administration did just announce, because it was pretty big, this policy. They're expanding the use of that same Title 42 policy, the pandemic-era restrictions that allow for expulsion without guaranteed asylum hearings. And it's going to allow them to dramatically step up expulsions of Cubans, Nicaraguans, Haitians, Venezuelans. They make up the majority of those crossing. You oppose Title 42. Does that mean you oppose what the Biden administration's doing?
Well, it's a complicated answer. So the administration, in the absence of any legislation from the Congress, has very few tools available. I'm a staunch opponent of Title 42. In fact, I think Title 42 is the reason why those apprehension or encounter numbers are so high, because people kept trying over and over and over again. When you're expelled from the border, you're going to try in different areas. I think it also helped fuel the human trafficking that we've seen a significant increase in. And all of this started with the Trump administration. When in my conversations with the Department of Homeland Security, because a Louisiana judge essentially created a situation where they have to continue to use Title 42, they can't go to a different policy which was used prior to Title 42 called Title 8. Mm-hmm. Now, Title 8 is much more punitive, and I think that is what the administration is ultimately going to go toward once a judge allows the Biden administration to do away with Title 42.
Which could come in June when the Supreme Court
could come in June.
rules.
But even then, Margaret, we will not have had a legislative solution. So all of these executive branch efforts really are just temporary Band-Aids. Whether it's Title 8, whether it's Title 42, we need to make sure that Congress acts.
Yeah, and it sounds like you don't have a lot of high hopes for that kind of action. But let me ask about the Biden policy. So it's going to allow up to 30,000 migrants per month from the 4 countries we just listed to enter if they have a U.S. sponsor. It'll also allow migrants to apply via cell phone app, something called CBP-1. Does someone fleeing abject poverty really have a cell phone to apply for access?
The vast majority of refugees who are fleeing their home countries do have cell phones. That's how they communicate with one another. That's how they communicate with the folks at home. But I will tell you, we do need far more robust State Department involvement, especially for those who do not have access to that kind of technology. We need far greater education. Many of the refugees that I have spoken to, especially over the last couple of weeks, have no concept of what the asylum process is.
Yeah.
Their idea is, I'm going to go to the border, I'm going to get a job, and I'm going to help my family. Something all of us would do, of course. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done, whether it's assisting those who don't have a cell phone access the services and legal pathways offered through CBP One, or whether it is helping to educate folks about those legal pathways so that they have a better shot.
I asked you that because I know some have argued it's discriminatory against those who have the least. Mexico, as part of this Biden agreement, has agreed to take about 30,000 people a month from the 4 countries. But one of the things that we've consistently heard over the past few years, and it was a harsh criticism of the Trump administration, is that when individuals are pushed back to Mexico and they're awaiting some kind of action, they face a lot of violence.
That's right.
So if you criticized it during the Trump administration, you must be a critic during the Biden administration.
Absolutely. And that's why I'm grateful that the president's going to Mexico City to talk to the president. Every step of the journey along the way for these refugees, people who leave with little more than a backpack and their hopes and dreams, experience a nightmarish journey along the way. And many migrants have told me, in fact, that the most dangerous part of the journey is in Mexico. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But Margaret, not just in Mexico, but for the entire hemisphere. We are seeing people fleeing their home countries, heading to Costa Rica, heading to countries all south of here. We have to make sure that diplomatically we are engaging at the highest levels and finally giving the Western Hemisphere the kind of attention that it has lacked for a long time by the U.S. government.
Congresswoman, thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Margaret.
We'll be right back. Turning now to the war in Ukraine, we are joined by Maine's independent Senator Angus King, who just returned from a trip to Kyiv. Good morning to you, Senator. I understand you just got back last night, and you met Friday with President Zelensky. What was the purpose of this visit?
I once did a visit overseas, and an old man in Pakistan, as a matter of fact, said, "I know why you were here." And I said, "Why is that?" And he said, "Because one day of seeing is better than 100 days of reading." And I believe you got to see, you got to be there and meet the people in person. And we had a very informative trip. There's a lot to learn and a lot to be able to communicate back here about what's going on in Ukraine.
Well, as you were over there, here, the White House announced it was releasing roughly $3 billion in security aid to Ukraine. It was the biggest sort of one-time package. It included, for the first time, tank-busting armored vehicles. Why such a surge now? Is it to get ahead of what may be a pretty serious spring offensive? What are we preparing for?
Well, there are two factors, and the Ukrainians particularly, the first thing is air defense. I mean, they're just being pummeled. That's too mild a word in terms of their energy infrastructure. So air defense is part of it, Patriot missiles. But also what's going on in the East is essentially trench warfare. It's almost World War I. It's horrible. And these armored vehicles are designed to deal with that kind of situation, to give the Ukrainians a fighting chance against this invasion that's going on. And to put it in perspective for Americans, it's as if our East Coast, from Maine to Florida and then west to Houston, Texas, was being occupied by a foreign power. That's the entire eastern edge of Ukraine is occupied, and that's where this fight is going to be, and that's why these maneuver vehicles are going to be so important.
But this drawdown, which is what they call it technically, presidential authority, allows for an immediate or close to immediate delivery of some of this weaponry. And I am hearing increased concern here in the United States that sending weapons there is depleting U.S. stockpiles in a way that's concerning to some officials. How concerned are you about that, and how do you in Congress get ahead of that to make sure the U.S. isn't hurt?
Well, part of it is replenishing our stockpiles, but you're right. That's a decision that the Pentagon, the Defense Department, has to weigh when they're doing these drawdowns. And by the way, a lot of this equipment is coming from other countries. It's not just coming from the United States. So some of the fighting vehicles are coming from France, Patriot battery from Germany. So that is an issue, but it's one that I know in the deliberations about what the drawdowns are going to look like, stockpiles is part of the issue.
Well, and it also makes me think of the two of the conversations we just had in this program in terms of potential slash to defense spending that could potentially happen if this House proposal actually gets approved.
It would be catastrophic to cut off aid to Ukraine at this point. I would just ask those people that are making those noises to read a little history. Google Sudetenland in 1938, Rhineland in 1936, when Hitler could have been stopped. When he wasn't stopped, we ended up with 55 million deaths worldwide. This is a moment where we know that Putin wants to take over Ukraine. He wants to rebuild the Soviet Union. Maya Angelou says if someone tells you who they are, you should believe them.
Right.
And who he is a guy that wants to rebuild the Soviet Empire. And this is a place where he can be stopped. The Ukrainians are fighting for us, for our values. The aid that we're providing to them isn't charity. It's self-interest.
And you believe there is enough accounting for what is being given?
I'm so glad you asked that, because that was part of my mission. I spent a lot of time in Kyiv on accountability. And in fact, sitting across from President Zelensky, just as you and I are, I asked him point blank, what's the status of accountability? If there's a scandal, it's going to kill our ability to support you. He understands that. And then later, we had a meeting with many of their defense officials and their finance people. They're working with Deloitte, the accounting firm. They're working with SAP software. They're accounting for every spare part that's coming into the country. Plus, we have an inspector general from the Pentagon who's going over, I think, next month. I was very impressed by the level of accountability. And so this argument that somehow the money's being wasted, I don't think holds water.
Let me ask you about things here at home and the conversation about the U.S. border that we have been having. There are Republicans who want to get something done in this new Congress. You've got Republican-held House. You've got a 51-49 Senate. Is there any possibility of getting legislation on immigration or anything?
To me, there's an obvious deal on immigration, which is heightened border security, which is very complicated. And I want to talk to the Congresswoman that you just had on, talking about what the ideas that she has, Republicans along the border, the Republican Congressman Gonzalez. I want to learn, and there are a lot of people working on how do we figure out the border. But the deal is increased border security, a path to citizenship for dreamers, and workforce. I'm hearing from businesses in Maine all the time about a shortage of workers. It's one of our biggest economic problems after inflation. So we've got to work on legal immigration for workforce. So I think, as I say, there's a package, and border security is where it starts. And I believe, I'm delighted the administration, the president's gone down there today. They should have gone sooner, in my view. But let's work on this, because we can't have the chaos and the humanitarian crisis that we have. Let's find that, but then put together a package involving dreamers and involving workforce. That's where I think we can move, and we ought to be able to move in a bipartisan way.
Well, you're a centrist. You're an independent, though you caucus with Democrats. So you can say you want to work with everyone, but the politics right now are just so divisive. I read something you told the New Yorker last year, where you said you have never been so worried about the future of the country because the structure of our system is at risk. Do you still feel that way? Is it improving?
Well, what happened in the House this week wasn't reassuring, because what you had was 20 people. I did the math. 3.7% of the membership of Congress held it hostage for a week. And I don't know what that foretells for the future. Yes, that is a concern. On the other hand, since I had that quote, which I certainly think has some validity, we've had one of the most productive Congresses in the last 25 or 30 years, almost all on a bipartisan basis. Not all, but the infrastructure bill, the CHIPS Act, the PACT Act for the veterans, all of those bills were done on a bipartisan basis. And they started, interestingly, from the ground up. They started organically from a few members getting together, working from the middle out. The leadership blessed it. They allowed it to happen. But that's the path, and I think immigration is a great opportunity to do the same thing.
All right. Well, we'll end on that optimistic note. Senator, thank you for joining us.
Thank you,
we'll be
Margaret.
back in a moment with Ukraine's ambassador to the United States, Oksana Marakova. Stay with us. We are joined by the Ukrainian ambassador to the United States, Oksana Marakova. Welcome back to the program. Always good to have you here. I understand you are just back from visiting your family in Ukraine. Over the holidays, we saw Russia bombed hospitals on Christmas, on New Year's. They were also bombing your country. What is life like during the holiday season?
Well, it was very good to be home, you know, when this invasion started in February 24th, until my first trip home in April, and it was right after my hometown was liberated, a couple of days literally before that, I always woke up thinking, is that a bad dream? Like, I always try to, you know, fight with the reality. But, you know, going back always, on the one hand, gives you a good perspective of how horrible it is. And on the other hand, inspires, because you see everyone not giving up. And everyone is, even throughout the holiday seasons, when the bombs are still flying everywhere, the destruction is enormous, people are very focused on winning. People are very focused on helping each other. And there was still a festive spirit everywhere. People were singing, you know, people were trying to give gifts to each other. But of course, the main focus is helping our brave defenders and doing everything possible to win.
We were just talking with Senator King about this massive package President Biden just signed off on, which also had a sort of increase in the type of weapons and defense items for Ukraine. Why do you need this so immediately? What are you preparing for?
Well, first of all, let me take this moment to thank the previous Congress for voting on the legislation and allowing us to have the possibility to have these packages this year for everything that we need, from the financial assistance, but most importantly, security assistance.
That was a $45 billion.
Yes, yes. And the fact that, you know, we have this support from American people is very valued in Ukraine. So everyone, you know, President, Congress, big thank you. Why do we need more? Because we see that, A, we need to increase the liberation speed of our land. We need to free more people as soon as possible, because we see what happens when they're under occupation. We also do not intend to stop. We do not intend to take operational pauses, which Russia probably needs, because they have problem with their motivation. They have problem with even the rockets. I mean, they have so many of them, but we would like to faster get to peace, which means we have to liberate our territories faster. So whatever we can get, from air defense to all the armored vehicles to everything that you saw in the package, we need even more, because we are facing much larger enemy.
So this package of $45 billion from the last Congress should take you through next year, according to some officials, U.S. officials. When President Zelensky was here in Washington on that surprise visit, he did meet with Kevin McCarthy, who is now Speaker of the House. Did you get assurances that U.S. support will continue with Republicans in control?
We are fighting for the same values and for the same principles. We are fighting against the evil, which is a threat not only to Ukraine, it's an existential threat for us, but it's a threat to everyone who believes in democracy. And I can say that our meetings during the president's visit here, both with president, administration, but also with all leaders in Senate and House of Representatives on a very strong bipartisan basis, have been very constructive and very productive. I believe American people support us and will support us until we together can win this.
When the president was here, President Zelensky was here, he said financial assistance is not charity, it's an investment, and he said Ukraine will be responsible with it. But given the concerns about corruption over years past, how do you respond when you were asked that question of how do you guarantee every dollar being given to Ukraine is going to defense and not to, embezzlement or something else?
I can only quote Senator King, who was just here. First, there are three types of assistances, right? Budget assistance, security, and humanitarian. On security, we're not getting the money, we're getting the goods, and we're very grateful for them. And the accountability for every piece that we are getting is there. We're not only sharing information, we're implementing NATO systems in place, and we're ready and already are providing information, and we know where everything is located. On the budget assistance, we have reported on all assistance that has been provided to us. There is an audit underway, but we have also sent, it's very clear where we are spending the money on, and our Ministry of Finance has reported even before the audit is complete, and I have shared that report with every member of the previous Congress, and we intend to do so in the future. The Inspector Generals are involved already, from Pentagon, but from Department of State, from Treasury. So we are not only open and ready, it's in our interest as well, in order to prove why we need more and that we're using it very effectively and efficiently. We would like to be as open as possible. Every US dollar that is given to us, we're putting it to a good use, and we're using it as an investment into our joint fight for democracy.
I want to ask you about something we've talked about in the past, and that is what's happening to Ukraine's children. More than 13,000 were deported to Russia. Are you having any luck in getting your children back?
Well, first, unfortunately, we know the number is much larger than that. The 13,000 is the official number of the children we accounted for, we found. But we know that we already have so many, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people who we don't know their fate yet. And until we liberate our territories, we will not know. Out of this 13,000, the Vice Prime Minister already informed that 212 have been returned. 212 is, of course, a small number, even though, unlike Russians, every child and every life is very precious to us. So we're so happy that this 112 are home, but we will not get tired and we will not stop until all of them are back home. That's why we need more weapons to liberate our territories and people.
Ambassador, we'll continue to follow the story and talk to you. Thank you. We have to go, and we'll be right back. If you can't watch the full Face the Nation, you can set your DVR, or we are available on demand. Plus, you can watch us through our CBS or Paramount Plus app and on our streaming network. That's going to do it for us today. Thank you for watching. Until next week. For Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.